This is an example of the kind of document that has stirred controversy without any reason. It's a memorandum sent to Bill Moyers, who was a press aide for Lyndon Johnson, the new president, sent by Nicholas Katzenbach, the Deputy Attorney General, on November 25, 1963. This is the very day that President Kennedy was buried on a Monday following the Friday assassination. This document has been quoted out of context. Usually, the people who use this document focus on items 1 and 2 only. The public must be satisfied that Oswald was the assassin, that he did not have Confederates who are still at large, and that the evidence was such that he would have been convicted at trial. People wrongly see this as somehow sinister, but if you think about it, it's anything but. But let's take a look at number 2. Speculation about Oswald's motivation ought to be cut off, and we should have some basis for rebutting thought that this was a communist conspiracy, or, as the Iron Curtain Press is saying, a right-wing conspiracy to blame it on the communists. Unfortunately, the facts on Oswald seem about too pat, too obvious. Marxist, Cuba, Russian wife, and so on. The Dallas police have put out statements on the communist conspiracy theory, and it was they who were in charge when he was shot and thus silenced. Now, wouldn't these concerns have been on the minds of government officials who were totally innocent? The fact was that Oswald was murdered just the day before, and so this complicated the ability to turn the page on the Kennedy assassination, assuming that there was no conspiracy. And therefore, Katzenbach was trying to explain to Moyers the important things that needed to be kept in mind in light of Oswald's murder after the shocking assassination of President Kennedy. What people don't do is quote Katzenbach's very first paragraph, where he says, "It is important that all of the facts surrounding President Kennedy's assassination be made public in a way which will satisfy people in the United States and abroad that all the facts have been told, and that a statement to this effect be made now." In other words, Katzenbach is saying we need to have a procedure for investigating the assassination and putting the facts, all the facts, out. It is very misleading, purposely so, to quote the second and third paragraphs, but to ignore the first paragraph, which is what most conspiracy writers do. If you're going to take literally what he says in paragraphs 2 and 3, and not only take literally what he says, but interpret it in a particular way when it is open to multiple interpretations, then you at least have the obligation to report the words in the first paragraph and let people make their own judgment as to what that means. In fact, there's very little way to interpret the first paragraph except that it is a way to acknowledge that all the facts need to come out. As for the second and third paragraph, let's take a look at that again. The public must be satisfied that Oswald was the assassin, that he did not have Confederates who are still at large. Well, that would have been a reasonable hope for government officials, because if the public was not satisfied that Oswald was the assassin and had no Confederates, this would be a problem going forward for the federal government. Do a thought experiment. Let's pretend that Katzenbach was innocent of nefarious objectives, which is what I believe. But let's just pretend that he was innocent. Wouldn't he have reason to think that this was an important objective? Especially if Oswald was the lone assassin, as most people thought at the time. They thought that because of the evidence against Oswald and how it pointed only to him. and how the things that Oswald had, the rifle, the pistol, the flight from the Texas School Book Depository all by himself, pointed to him and to him alone. So there was a possibility that even though Oswald was the lone assassin, Americans would think otherwise, very much as we see today that the election of 2020 was completely fair, but millions of Americans see otherwise. And this is a threat to the peace and stability of the United States of America. Similarly, if Oswald was the lone assassin, it would do no good if people thought that he wasn't the lone assassin, that he had Confederates. And so what Katzenbach is saying essentially is that if we get all the facts surrounding President Kennedy's assassination out, there will be a greater likelihood that the public will be satisfied with the truth that Oswald was the assassin. But this has been looked at in another way because that's what the conspiracy theorists want to believe. They want to believe that our leaders were criminals and that they were involved in some kind of nefarious conspiracy. You would think that if that was the case, Katzenbach and his Confederates would have destroyed this memo. But in fact, the memo, when seen in its entirety, actually exonerates Katzenbach of such theories. As for the second paragraph, speculation about Oswald's motivation ought to be cut off, and we should have some basis for rebutting thought that this was a communist conspiracy. Again, the longer people believe that Oswald may have been involved in a conspiracy, this creates a huge problem for public trust and public order, and it is not something that should be tolerated if Oswald was a lone gunman. This is the purpose of government, to tell the truth about things, and it was a mess by this time because the Dallas police messed up Oswald's security and also messed up the explanation of what was happening by talking about a possible conspiracy theory when they had no evidence for it whatsoever. And so the Keystone Cops nature of the Dallas police, the fact that they were in charge when he was shot and thus silenced, was a legitimate concern for Katzenbach. Let's see what he says at the very end. I think this objective may be satisfied by making public as soon as possible a complete and thorough FBI report on Oswald and the assassination. This may run into difficulty of pointing to inconsistencies between this report and statements by Dallas police officials, but the reputation of the Bureau is such that it may do the whole job. Katzenbach is not saying that the FBI must do the whole job. He's saying that it may do the whole job. And at that time, there was no plan to have an independent commission such as the Warren Commission. That was only decided upon by President Johnson 4 days later on Thursday, November 28th. And so Katzenbach is dealing with what he has to deal with at the time. And that is that the FBI was collecting information on the assassination. They had made mistakes, but it wasn't clear what those mistakes were at the time. And if they did release a complete and thorough FBI report that made all of the facts surrounding President Kennedy's assassination public, then it's hard to criticize Katzenbach's memo or his purpose or his recommendation here. So this, in a nutshell, is an example of an historical document that has been completely twisted out of shape just to serve the interests of conspiracy theorists who don't care about the truth, but who only want to squeeze the evidence into a configuration that will serve their interests. The truth be damned. We'll look at other documents like this in other episodes. Thanks for watching.